What if I told you that up to 90% of your work problems could be reduced by using simple processes and techniques? Up to 90%. Would that be interesting to you? Well, that's exactly what studies show effective risk management can do for a project at work. So I want to talk a little bit more about risk management. But first, I want to give you a little bit more context. When I say a project, I'm really talking about a specific endeavor that produces a unique product, service, or result. So it could be something like a marketing campaign, implementing a marketing campaign, or developing software, or from a personal note, say building a patio for your home. Project management is really the art and science by which you would try to make a project successful. So it could be activities like making sure that you understand exactly what deliverables you need for that project. It could be finding resources and making sure those resources are organized. It could be creating a schedule for the work that's necessary, etc., etc., etc. But one of the most undervalued, but potentially most valuable aspect of project management is risk management. And really all that means is trying to make sure that those bad things that could happen on a project, the probability is reduced and the probability that good things happen is increased. So you can see why it could potentially be very impactful for a project success. Now, the Project Management Institute says there's 4 main standard processes by which you would do risk management. So let me go over those. They're very sequential and they're very interdependent on each other, so they kind of make logical sense. The first is identifying risks. Once you've identified the risks for your project, you then assess those risks. Once you've made an assessment of those risks, you want to say, how would I potentially treat them? Once you come up with a plan for treatment, then you would say, how do I monitor for those risks and control them on an ongoing basis? So those are the 4 main processes that I want to review with you today. So the first one is identifying risks. And the best practice for doing this is first defining categories of risk for your project. In this way, you make sure that you don't lose any of the big buckets of things that could potentially affect your project. I'll just give you a couple examples here. You could define it very basically as external and internal risks, right? So an external risk, say for your patio project, might be a hurricane breezing through, right? Internally, it might be something that affects your resources that you currently have allocated to the project. So say your carpenter gets sick. Right? So once you figure out the different categories, then you basically just brainstorm, you interview, you figure out with your project team members what the potential risks are. And then you'll have a good list and a holistic, comprehensive list of things that could affect your project. Right? So that's really what step 1 is meant to do. And that really feeds right into step 2, which is now assessing the risks on your project. Now, one of the basic ways to do this is to create an impact and probability matrix. And what this is really just a graph that has on the y-axis probability from 0% to 100% likelihood that this risk will occur. And on the x-axis, say a scale, an arbitrary scale of say 1 to 10, about how impactful this risk is to your project. And you would then just plot out the different risks that you identified within this spectrum and say relative to each other. What you get then is 4 different quadrants of risks. And what you probably want to focus most on is the top right quadrant, which is the highest probability and the highest impact. The lowest risk and the lowest probability and the lowest impact, you probably want to potentially slough off as not important enough for your focus. So you really want to try to do some prioritization during this activity. Now, once you've kind of qualitatively done that, you want to go back over again and quantitatively try to figure out what is the impact of this risk. And generally what we do is we put a numerical value to them. So instead of having this kind of arbitrary scale, you would now say, what is my dollar amount impact for a particular risk? So say if the hurricane breezed through and wiped out all your materials, and your materials cost, $1,000, that is the monetary value that you would put. Now, once you've done that, you would then try to figure out the expected monetary value for that risk. Expected monetary value is the impact, the dollar amount, times the probability. So let's say that a hurricane breezing through would be 10% likely. Right? So if it's 10% likely, then the expected monetary value is 100, which is basically 10% times that $1,000 that it would cost you to re-get those materials. Once you've done that, now you have a very good prioritization list of risks that you can then say, now again, I might just want to treat a certain section. Once you've done that, you move on kind of to the third process, which is creating treatment plans for those risks, those top priority risks that you've identified in the second process. And what you want to do here is basically figure out what type of treatment I want to do. And there's 4 general treatment types. The first is to avoid the risk. The second is mitigate the risk. The third is to transfer the risk. And the fourth is to accept the risk. So if we talk about avoidance, you can simply say, I am not going to build a patio, right? That's the best way to kind of avoid the risk, but then again, it also invalidates the project. The second method is mitigating the risk, and you can do this by saying, if your risk is around quality, putting in a quality control process. The third is transferring the risk, and the typical way that we do this in our daily lives is through getting insurance, right? Car insurance, life insurance, etc. Right? And the fourth is just accepting the risk, basically saying, I can tolerate this type of risk and this potential impact that it would have. So those are the 4 treatment options, and you would describe in detail exactly what different things that you would do to address each of those prioritized risks. And what you come out with are contingency plans, fallback plans, potentially contracts that help you with transference of risk or risk mitigation, cost reserves, so money reserves for a rainy day, and things like that. So now you've done an identification of the risks, you've done an assessment of those risks so you can prioritize them, and you've figured out a treatment for each of those prioritized risks. The last step is really then monitoring and making sure that as you go through the project, you are able to see when risks actually occur, right? What we call a risk trigger. And then you'll have a peace of mind that at least you have a plan for the majority of those events occurring, right? So then you would basically execute on any of your treatment plans. And you also want to be vigilant about reassessing and going back through steps 1 through 3 to figure out, are there new risks out there as I go through my project? Are there potentially new assessments I need to make and potentially new treatment plans I need to make? So that's really what the 4th process is. It's kind of a continuous improvement, continuous iteration of the first 3 steps. So that's really the 4 different processes that are best practices for risk management. I hope this has kind of given you a general sense as to the simple concepts behind those processes. And it can really make a difference. Like I said, if you can reduce 90% of your problems on a project, wouldn't you want to do it?